So before we have 2 or 3 people asked to speak, and anybody else who would like to share the mic, Elizabeth asked to come up and say a few words.
I just wanted to thank all of you for coming out today, and I really wanted to thank all of the organizations who have made all of this possible, because I wouldn't have been able to do it without them. And my new heroes are Michael Roth, Lon Rosen, and Steve Brenner, along with every one of you that came out today. So thank you very, very much. And any stories that you want to tell, I'm game for. The more I get to learn about him, the happier I am. Thank you.
We were wondering what to serve today. We figured throw everything out there, but we did. It was important to have hot dogs because everybody knows how much Joe likes his hot dogs, and so the hot dogs are there. And I will tell one Joe story. First year the building was open, Joe was walking to his seat and did not have a credential on and was stopped. And security officer didn't know who Joe was, which is really quite remarkable in this town in 1999. And he went on the radio the next day and went on a Joe tirade. And they stopped me, they didn't acknowledge me, they didn't know who I was. He said, now I was nice until they wouldn't let me go to my seat after I told them who I was. And he went, and he was the one that coined the term redcoats. And we have Joe to thank for calling our officers the redcoats. But I will say this, I went on with him and explained the rules to him, and it calmed him a little until the callers that day kept encouraging him. But it was very important for him the next time he came out to find me and to find the officer that did stop him and to apologize to that officer just in case it made his life difficult to be sort of the brunt of his joke. And so I think that sums up Joe. He would go on a tirade, and he was very sure what he wanted to say and make the issue maybe bigger than it was. But Joe was also very kind to those around him and wanted to make sure if you were the butt of one of these that you didn't take it personal, because it's sports, it's radio, and it's Joe, and nobody should take anything personal. So that's my Joe story. And I'd like to bring up my friend Lon Rosen, who I think Joe helped raise. Here's Lon.
Raise. Elizabeth, you really don't want to hear all those stories, trust me. I brought this picture, and I wish there was a camera here, so just like school, I'm going to pass it around. You'll all remember this, Joe. Back in the 80s, when I worked for the Lakers and Kings, Joe was a fixture in more ways than one. On days of games, Joe would make his way down to the Forum at about 11 o'clock. He'd be a shoot-around. He would then hang out in the PR offices outside Bob's office and my office and basically camp out there all day long. And the game would start, Joe would be in his usual seat, and then after the game, he'd do some of his interviews. But he was always the last one in the locker room, because there was always this one player that he would always make sure he would speak to. And somebody posted this picture yesterday, and it brings back memories. It's 2 kind of young guys, and I'll sort of pass it around. It's Irvin and Joe with his microphone, and there you go. I met Joe when I used to sneak at the Dodger Stadium in 1977. I was a high school kid, and a friend of mine, Steve Ross, and I decided we wanted to get into sports, and we figured the best way to get into sports was to sneak into sports, and we did. And we'd be chased off many fields, but Joe would always look as if, who are those guys? So we introduced ourselves to him and his partner in crime at that point, the late Jim Pells, which was an interesting combination. Joe being Joe, and Jim Pells being about this tall. They were always together. And back then, Joe was a stringer. He basically would do interviews and sell them to different radio stations, whoever. And on his tape recorder, all it said was the news. So here on this high school, what does this mean, the news? And he would explain to us what his job was. So over the years, we developed a relationship. I went to USC, which he of course hated and would never let me forget that. I then was fortunate enough to get a job. Mr. Steiner hired me to work for the Lakers and Kings and had a very nice run there. And like I told you, Joe was a fixture there. We lived his life, all of us. We knew his ups and downs, his early girlfriends, the ones that worked, the ones that didn't work. Joe didn't lack confidence, is all that you know. He would rip us for what we wore, our dress, and we say, Joe, that shirt's not, yes it is, it's the pocket, he would go into his shirt, his hair, he'd rip us all for our hair, but Joe, look at, his hair was good. And then we'd have the USC-UCLA fights, and we would have these fights on and on. USC would do great in football, UCLA would be great in basketball. And I said, but Joe, you didn't go to UCLA, you went to Valley College. That didn't matter to Joe. He would hammer away at this forever and ever. During those days, he would rip us all. It didn't matter if we had a girlfriend, he'd make some story up about that. But he truly loved the athletes, and the athletes loved him. And it wasn't just the home athletes. You'd see Joe in the visiting team locker room, and the players were looking for him. I mean, they knew him for years, and they trusted Joe. Obviously, the media was a bit different there, where you had more personal relationships with them, and were able to sort of sit down and talk to them. It's a little different now with some of the athletes. But Joe always had that very unique relationship with the athletes. And I guess back then is when he met another one of his buddies, Mr. Dougie Gregorian. So Doug was a big writer for Long Beach Press Telegram, and Joe was beginning his radio career. So I'm sorry, I forgot. Harold Examiner then, senior moment today. And Doug became one of his running mates. We'll talk more about that in a little while. Joe was a good friend to me and to many people. And over the years, as I became a sports agent, Joe would ask me from time to time, as he asked, I'm sure, some other folks in this room, but I think I did a couple, to help him with his contracts. For any of you that had that honor of doing a contract for Joe, you do a contract and something would happen at work, and instead of yelling at whoever his boss was at that time, he would call me and yell at me. And I would say, Joe, I give you the contract for free here. I don't think you should be yelling at me here, but be my guest. We go through, and then next day Joe will be back on the radio. Well, Joe's career continued. Doug became his partner, and they were great radio people. We loved listening to Joe and Doug. And both these guys were my friends. But they had a segment, I don't know, 10 years ago. I'm sorry not to use the word. They had something called the asshole of the week. These are my friends. And for 3 consecutive weeks, I became the asshole of the week. I would call Doug and say, Doug, I got kids, my dad is really pissed. Can you guys stop? Oh, I'll get you to stop. It's really Joe. I'm like, yeah, all right. Last week 1, I apologize to Joe. My dad really pissed. Tone it down. All right, we'll find another guy. Week 2, asshole once again. Now, his contract is coming up. No, this was back in, it was like 05, 06. It was 04. I was actually, my first stint was the Dodgers. And I had, we made a personnel move in our broadcast team. Joe and Doug and Larry and the other media person wasn't one of us to do at the time. Week 2, I'm an asshole, and his contract is up. And he calls me during, hey, I gotta get that contract done. I said, what asshole? So I'm thinking, okay, it's done, right? No more. Week 3. I hit the trifecta at this point, and I called Doug. I said, Doug, can you help me here? I'll get Joe to stop. So I go meet Joe at one of his free restaurants, trainees or something like that, and I said, Doug, you got it. Joe, you just got to stop. Finally, he stopped and we got him another contract. That's a friend. What's that?
Who was your successor?
As his agent?
No.
At the Dodger, they had a couple of people, so they got back to me. I don't know if all of you knew this, but Joe was a big memorabilia collector. He didn't just wear those jerseys, he had a bunch of them that he got signed. He didn't really want people to know, so he would kind of, sneak in and get it signed. And the tough signature, believe it or not, was his friend Magic Johnson. So after Irvin retired, Joe had this collection of jerseys. And he came to me and said, it would mean a lot to me if I got these 2 jerseys signed and my 18 pictures or whatever it was. He came to the forum and Irvin said he would do it, and they went to a back room up in the office, and for the next 30 minutes he signed all his jerseys and everything. And Joe also liked to collect programs. So wherever I would go around the country to big events, whether it was a Super Bowl, NBA Finals, an All-Star game, I would bring him programs and slip it to him, and he loved those programs. In 1992, when the Dream Team was playing, Joe made the big move. He made a out-of-the-country call to me and said, could you get me a program? So, Joe, I'll get you a program, of course. So I bring the program home, and for like 4 months, I didn't see Joe. But weekly, do you have the program? Yes, Joe, I have the program. Do you have the program? Yeah. I end up mailing the program to Joe. It gets lost in the mail. So, Joe, I mailed it to you. I didn't get it. This went on for another couple of weeks. I had another program. So I finally gave it to him. 3 months later, he goes, I got good news for you. I go, what? He goes, I finally got that other program. I said, oh, let me have it back. He goes, oh, no, I'm keeping that one. That was Joe. I know other people want to speak. I'll tell you one last story about Joe. Joe thought he was a great athlete, special athlete, agile, quick, everything you expect in an athlete. In the early 80s, we would play basketball at the Forum. Early 80s. We would play the PR staff, some of the media folks, and other people would just jump into the game. So this is 1983, 1984. Mark McGuire is visiting Los Angeles right after his college basketball career is over with DePaul, and he's playing basketball with us, and these games were actually competitive. And Joe would, I'm going to play today. So, everybody would walk out the court, and there's Joe. Well, Joe would be our zone defense. You couldn't get past Joe. So Mark McGuire decides, I'm going to take this guy on. So Mark kind of gets the ball, he shakes and bakes, he does his move, and runs head on into Joe. And now, Mark, 240, 50 pounds, strong. He went down like this. Joe didn't move, called a foul, went up and shot 2 free throws. 3 or 4 weeks ago when Joe went into the hospital, I get a text message from Elizabeth, but from Joe. And Joe, for the last couple months, obviously his health wasn't good. He was looking for a job, and he wanted to work with our new radio station. We didn't have any positions open, but he would ask. And Elizabeth sent me a note. Now this, I think, is right when Joe was very ill. In the hospital, and Elizabeth wrote, Lon, it's Elizabeth. He's in the hospital and is in very serious condition. He told me you were working on helping him out. I'm not sure if he missed any appointments. So up until the end, Joe was still looking for that final job. And Joe, you got your job. Anytime you want it, buddy. We're all going to miss you. Thank you.
Looking around, it's another testament to Joe, the fact that there's all types of people here. There's media, there's management, there's ownership. I mean, Joe was friends to everybody. And so, Dr. Corian is going to speak next, who may have spent more hours in a room with Joe than anybody but Elizabeth. And after that, if you want to just sort of file up and say a few words, I know it'll be very meaningful to to everybody here. Here's Doug.
There are certain people in life you come across that are larger than it. There are certain people in life you come across who leave a definitive imprint on your own. There are certain people in life you come across that are such dominant personalities that you expect them to escape the taxman who's always waiting at the gate, set to collect his due from all of us. Such a person, of course, was Joe McDonnell, who, to put it mildly, glided through the pathways of the years at his own unique beat, never compromising, never straying from his passionate beliefs, never turning the other cheek, no matter what the consequences. As my friend Larry Kahn so aptly put it, Joe did it his way throughout his colorful existence, and how many human beings could say that? As we all know, Joe had excessively gargantuan passions for eating, and for the Dodgers, and for the Lakers, and for speaking into a radio microphone to sporting aficionados around the Southern California basin. It was the latter pursuit that resulted in his becoming an iconic, if not cult figure, on the sports talk landscape with his strong, lively voice, with his strong, lively opinions, and with his strong, lively interplay with the callers. Joe never was one to parse his statements, and he could be humorous, mean-spirited, lighthearted, loutish, uplifting, demeaning, caustic, hilarious, vicious, zany, and most of all, entertaining. I was his radio partner off and on across a 13-year span on 4 stations with the McDonnell Douglas Show, and I had an up-close glimpse of this man whose turgid views on so many subjects inspired me to nickname him the Big Nasty, and inspired either undying devotion or hatred, but seldom indifference from his listeners. Beyond the noise and controversial asides, Joe was a terrific journalist. He knew more inside goings-on about the Lakers and Dodgers throughout the 1980s and 1990s than any other LA media member, and that resulted in his breaking a lot of intriguing stories. Obviously, he changed my life in so many ways. I never would have been a full-time sports talk host without his loyal support, and the glad memories I have of our days together will remain forever with me. We were fortunate to have great producers like Nick Zaccanino and David Bassett, and great sports update announcers like Rod Van Hook, Scott St. James, Dave Stone, David Joseph, Ted Sobel, Jeff Biggs, Lou Stowers, and Mark Thomason. People always ask me how I remain pals with Joe since, well, the opinions he voiced about me on the air can be every bit as biting as the opinions he would unleash on Del Harris, Frank McCourt, John Robinson, Kevin Malone, Paul DePodesta, Randy Funn, Andy Roser, Steve Lavin, and most of all, of course, USC. I occasionally was referred to by Joe either as a moron or an imbecile or an idiot, which never upset me too greatly since I've always been a guy who can accept the truth. Of course, we did our ups, downs, and in-betweens, both professionally and personally, but we remained pals until the end. I think the happiest I ever saw Joe was that evening on March 30th, 2007 at the Sportsman Lodge when he married Elizabeth Kahn, whom I referred to as a modern-day Florence Nightingale for her unstinting assistance in recent years as Joe was beset with various serious ailments. Another person who has been there for Joe throughout his travails has been his first cousin, Fred Plesner. It would be remiss not mentioning the impact still another person, the Long Beach restaurateur Phil Trainee, had on Joe. Joe would visit Trainee's place at least 7 times a week for almost 15 years, much to the enjoyment of Phil, who always rolled out the red carpet for Joe. No doubt, Joe had his passionate, unconditional loves beyond the athletic orbit, where he grew close to Jerry West, Wilt Chamberlain, Bill Sharman, Bob Welch, Eddie Murray, Magic Johnson, Pedro Guerrero, Jim Hill, Mike Scioscia, Kirk Gibson, Tommy Lasorda, and countless others. But I also forgot to mention, I'm sorry, Bill Burtka, of course he's here. He loved his mother and father and aunts. He loved Elizabeth. He loved Phil Trainee. He loved the Lakers and Dodgers. And he loved being a sports talk host and never gave up believing that the McDonnell Douglas Show would somehow have another resurrection. Only a couple months ago, he called me and asked if I'd be willing to return to the airways. I get emails almost every day from old fans who want us back on the air, he said. It now never will happen. Joe is now silent for good, but the roar he made all those years on the LA airways never will be forgotten by those many people who listen to him. Special mention to four PR people who are here: Bob Steiner, Mark Dellins, Johnny Black, and John Black. Is there one person I'm missing? I don't know.
Altieri.
Mike Altieri.
Oh, Mike Altieri, of course. Yeah. Thank you. Anyone else want to talk about Joe? Come on, Tom. With me.
I think what's really cool about my relationship with Joe is I'm a radio guy, and so people would assume that's how I knew Joe. It might come as no surprise. My original connection with Joe was through food. I owned a restaurant in Venice called Van Gogh's Ear, and it was only my 20s. And as a kid, I always loved going out and meeting the disc jockeys. I grew up in Elmira, New York. If a disc jockey was doing a remote from Elmira, Chrysler, Plymouth, and it was Labor Day, my mother took me there, and I spent all day just watching the disc jockey talk on the radio. So I owned this restaurant in Venice. It was called Van Gogh's Ear. And I would send Joe funny faxes and send him the menu. And one day I sent Joe a fax and asked him if he would like any food from the restaurant, because he thought that it was a funny menu that I had written for the restaurant. He used to read it on the air and give the restaurant free publicity. And so as thanks, I sent Joe a fax back in the days during faxes. And I asked Joe if he wanted anything to eat from the restaurant, and the phone rang 10 seconds later. And it was that famous voice, and Joe ordered some food, and I took it down just like that little boy who used to like to go meet the disc jockeys. I was 28 or 29 years old. I was not in the radio business. I was a young guy in Venice, with a small restaurant that I opened with a friend, and I went to meet the guy on the radio because Joe invited me down. And Joe and Doug rolled out the red carpet. They put me on the air. Tommy Lasorda came in that day. He was the next guest, and they didn't make me leave. And that photo you have on your book, Doug, of you hugging Tommy Lasorda was from that day when I went to meet the guy on the radio. And that's how big he was to take this kid, this boy who used to like to meet disc jockeys. I found my youth and my excitement for radio again because of Joe on the other side of that speaker, and his generosity, his love of people to invite a listener down. I could have been a serial killer who pretended to have a restaurant, but no, Joe trusted me. And Joe and I became friends ever since then. And just as an amazing coincidence, even worked at the same time, afternoon drive up against each other, Looney and Dave up against Joe and Doug back in the day. So isn't that amazing? That was only probably 6 or 7 years later how the stars aligned for that to happen. But the only reason I know Joe is because I loved meeting the guys on the radio.
I spoke at Joe's prayer service last night. Was not able to contain myself, so probably it will happen again, but I really don't care. I've known Joe. I was trying to remember the last week or so when I first met Joe, maybe 75, maybe 76. I have to be one of the, in the media at least, one of the people who's known him the longest. I was a bit older than him, not much. We were both in radio, so we did gravitate towards each other. This was a remarkable man. I love the adjectives Doug used. He had all of them. The good, one of my favorite words was stubborn. He was very stubborn, could drive you crazy, one of the reasons we bonded so well together were that we liked some of the same teams, but more importantly, we disliked a lot of the same teams. Joe, there's only a couple other people I know besides Joe who dislike the Celtics as much as I do. We bonded over our dislike for teams. And, sorry, Lon, another team we disliked a lot was SC. We bonded over our dislike for SC, and it went on and on. But he was just a wonderful person. I like talking about the other side of Joe, beyond the veneer that we saw of him as a sportscaster. He had a good heart. He was a wonderful person. He read a lot. He was so interested in many, many things. We were talking last night about how if Joe's in heaven right now, which I assume he is, he's probably gotten together some of the people he was fascinated with, in addition to his mother and father, people like Kennedy, Jack Ruby. He has to solve that Kennedy assassination eventually. So he probably has Jack Ruby, Oswald, and Kennedy all together now discussing what really happened, why Earp has to be there. Billy Clanton, I think, in the famous Tombstone fight, he loved those people as well. Last night they were playing one of Joe's favorite songs. I think if you know Joe, he loved James Taylor. And a couple times when I was at a reception one time, a Nancy Reagan reception for the stem cell research. James Taylor was involved in that. He played there. I told Joe about it. Do you have a tape of it? Oh, yes, I made him a tape. He was very happy. But last night, he had a flutist. I'm not sure what the right word is, or maybe they both apply. He played Fire and Rain. And there's a lyric at the end of Fire and Rain, I always thought I would see you again. It's got me last night, too. I always thought I would see Joe again. And just very sad I won't, but I'm glad for all the times we had together. So I'll miss Joe a lot.
Yes.
I don't have many prepared statements. Doug asked me to talk, so I'll talk. Actually, growing up in Southern California, I used to listen to Joe and Doug. And the first time I ever did anything involving Joe, I forget how old I was. I wasn't in the media. I was still in school in Irvine. And John Robinson was having lunch at a hotel diner in Irvine. I was driving around. And Joe's like, somebody go find John Robinson, find out what he's eating. And I was like, well, I'm in the area. You know, they were just killing John Robinson. I mean, it was just, it was great. So I enjoyed it. And so I showed up and kind of spied in the back to kind of see what John Robinson was eating. And I called in, and they had some fun with that. It was a long time ago, but it was great. But I mean, I love Joe. I think I had dinner with him the same time Ted was there a couple of weeks ago, and you know, he told me about his life and what was going on. And it was great because I listened to him, and then I got into media. I was like 19 years old when I started, the same age Joe started. Obviously, a difference, but we only had one battle in all those years. We worked together back in the 90s, and he was great. And every time I'd come to a game at Staples Center or back to the Forum when I first started, or Dodger Stadium, we'd always catch up, and he was just great to hear. And he was very encouraging in my career early on, you know, when I was terrible. Not that I'm not great now, but he would always give me pointers and encouragement, and I really appreciate it. I'm going to miss seeing him. And Elizabeth has been great and did some wonderful things with him, and so that's all.
Hi there, my name is Robert Allen. I've been associated with the Dodgers for 35 years. And we've been fortunate to be able to work in the press box for probably the last 28 years. So as I look around, I see a lot of faces here, and I remember when you guys were all startups. So you haven't did too bad for yourselves. One thing I'd like to share about Joe, we had, in the Dodgers press box, we had Pulitzer Prize winners. We had #1 talk show host. We had the top broadcaster in this. baseball, Vince Scully, we had everybody. If anybody was anybody. And then of course we had Joe McDonnell. I remember when I first met Joe, Steve Brenner had put me on there to work there. And I was only supposed to be a replacement for a few days. And so 28 years later, I'm still waiting for the other guy to show up. At that time, my partner and I at that time were told, well, just mind the front door and make sure everybody has a credential and follow the rules. So I looked at my partner and said, well, what are the rules? He said, I don't know. He said, check for credentials. So I thought, well, that's easy enough. I mean, you look at the credential, you look at the mugshot, go on in. Well, little did I know at that time that over the years, that would turn into not just checking the credential, but it would become to know the name, match the face, meet the personality. But beyond that, I was fortunate to be able to meet their families, like Joe's mom and his aunt. Having them bring me cookies. And I remember when I first met Joe's mom and his aunt, they brought me cookies, and I said, thank you, nice to meet you. And I said, well, maybe the next time we come, we're going to bring some cookies for Vince Scully. We're going to make him up a special batch of cookies. And I said, yeah, that would be nice. So a month or two goes by, they come back, and they bring the cookies, and she said, hey, do you remember me? I'm Joe McDonnell's mom. I go, no, I don't think I remember you. And he said, no, you remember me. No, I don't remember you. Of course, I knew who she was. So anyway, I said, I'm going to have to see your IDs. And they looked at me, my ID for what? And I said, well, you two are two of the sweetest ladies that I have ever met. I can't believe that Joe McDonnell has a mom and an aunt like you. So anyway, the cookies, there were two batches, one for Vince Scully, one for my partner at the time. So we take the cookies back there and we say, I wonder what's so special about these cookies from the ones that she wants to give us. And my partner said, well, I don't know, maybe they made him up with marijuana or something. And I said, you think so? So I switched the names around. Gave Vinny our cookies and we kept his cookies. So at the time, I walk in, I give Vinny the cookies. Hey Vinny, these cookies were made special for you from Joe McDonnell's mother. You want to take time just to say hi to her? Well, sure, Robert. Joe McDonnell's mother? So I said, yeah. Well, at that time, Joe didn't want his mom or his aunt or anybody else to go in the press box, but he was always a professional, always didn't want to involve that. So I said, well, Mrs. McDonnell, you two come with me. And he said, well, for what? Well, Vince Scully wants to thank you for the cookies. And he said, Vince Scully wants to thank us for the cookies? I said, well, they're special. I mean, meantime, my partner's in the back sampling the other cookies, and you know, they were okay. So anyway, they go in, they meet Vince Scully, and of course, you know, you can't just spend a minute talking with Vince Scully. They want to sit there, oh, you know, we've always liked this and that, and all the usual stuff. So in the background, Joe is over there sitting in the electric chair over there, and he looks down the hallway, and he sees his mom and his aunt talking to Vince Scully, and he just turned pale. He gets out of the chair, he walks towards him, Ron, what's my mom and my aunt doing here talking to Vince Scully? And I said, well, you know what? They're decent folk, they're not like you, Joe. They made special cookies for Vince Scully, and he wanted to thank them personally. So Joe just kind of looked at me and says, wow, I'm so embarrassed. Don't be embarrassed. I said, next time you try your mom's cookies, I think you're going to like them. I got one other quick story. It shouldn't take me long. Everybody knows Joe, the persona on the radio, on the air and all that, but every now and then Joe would have someone walk up and want to say, hey, I'd like to meet Joe McDonnell. I'm a fan of his and Doug's. Or whoever Joe was with that he hadn't been fired with. So this little kid was walking around the press box, and I could see him trying to look in and peek inside and see exactly what's going on in the press box. And I'm watching him. So finally the kid stops and he says, sir, is that where Joe McDonnell works at? And I says, well, as a matter of fact, yeah, he's at the end of the walkway right there. He's sitting right there. So he's cranking his neck trying to look in to see Joe McDonnell. So then he sees all these other media guys walking in and out, so he figures he's going to walk in. So I didn't get past me. I said, hey kid, where are you going? He says, I just want to go say hi to Joe McDonnell. And I said, get your butt outside here. This is for all the big shots and the big reporters and guys like Joe McDonnell, not for guys like you. So So he says, oh, okay. So he goes back. I said, wait a minute. I said, where do you know Joe McDonnell from? I said, well, me and my dad, we listened to him on the radio. Oh. I said, well, let me see if he's not too busy to talk to you. I run inside and I see Joe, and I said, hey, Joe, there's one of your sick fans outside asking to talk to you. He was polite. I thought I would just ask. And he said, well, who is he? I said, I don't know. He says him and his dad listen to you all the time. So Joe would tell him I'll be right out. And Joe always went out. He would never say no to anybody. And I don't care how good the game was or whatever was going on, he would come outside and talk. Well, Joe came out, and Joe was a pretty imposing figure. This was a little kid, probably about the size of Ted Soul. But anyway, so Joe gets to talking to the kid. And me and my partner, we have a little box we keep in the press box where every now and then somebody will give us something, you know. I think when your show was going, Doug, you guys gave us some hats that said the McDonnell Douglas show. And, oh, thanks, this is very nice. Threw them in the batch, you know. We don't care about the crummy hats. So anyway, as Joe was talking to the kid, I remember I had that hat in there. So I went and I got the hat and I got a pin. And as Joe was talking to the kid, I says, Joe, here's that hat you told me to get for you. You're going to sign for the kid. So Joe says, oh, okay. So Joe signed to the kid, you know, Big Joe. So anyway, so Joe says, well, by the way, kid, where's your dad at? Why don't you go bring him up here? And the kid says, well, my dad's dead. I came with my mom, and I just wanted to come up and see you, Joe. So, of course, Joe couldn't stand up. He had to lean up against the wall. So about the next 20 minutes or half an hour, him and the kid are having this engaging conversation going on about Joe's dad. So I guess the point I'm trying to say is, Joe really did have a big heart. So when I saw this Big Joe talking to this little kid, it reminded me of the old Mean Joe Green commercial where Joe Green had a bad day. He's leaving the football field and little kid says, here, Big Joe, Mean Joe, have this Coca-Cola. So little Mean Joe Green turns around and says, thanks, kid. So as the kid's walking off, Joe says, hey, kid, throws him his jersey. Well, that was the same feeling I had then when I saw Big Joe sign that hat to that little kid. And the kid looked up at Joe and says, gee, thanks, Big Joe. So that kind of the way things were behind the scenes with Joe McDonnell. And to all of you that had the good fortune of working with him, he really was a true blessing in our lives. And Joe, I'm dressed like this because that's how you remember me. So I hope that if I've got the good fortune to go up there, you'll be at the door to greet me when I get there.